Hi, so this is my rebuild video for the bin CV car. You can see all the parts laid out here. These are kind of the old parts and some of the new. Starting with the spindle. This is the throttle spindle, and I'm just replacing the O-ring. And just to show you which O-ring it is to use, in the kit you get a large, a medium and a small, and two really small. This is per carb. The one you want for the spindle is that sort of medium-sized one there. You slide it down the spindle to basically the second slot from the short end. And that'll become apparent why a little later. I'll just put a squirt of WD-40 onto the spindle and the O-ring there and just slide it down. So just showing that you want the countersunk holes facing out as you replace this into the body of the carby. And just kind of pushes it into place. And it's there that you see that the second slot is the one that's sticking out, and it's time to replace that throttle return plate. So you put the plate on and then replace the two screws. There's a little bit of play in this plate, which I'm just showing there. You basically want to line it up so that there's no friction on the throttle body spindle, and then snug them down. And just showing here that the throttle spindle moves easily, and that's kind of what you're looking for. So then it's the butterfly plate. Now this is a little tricky, but you can see there's this tiny little dimple. I'm trying to show it here. It's just a tiny dimple that basically goes up and out when you put this thing in. You'll be able to see it on your butterfly plate. So that is up and out, and you kind of slide the plate into place. This is tricky, and I'm just showing here that if you put a finger in through the sort of diaphragm, the upper side of the carb, you can help guide the plate into place here. A finger in the top. Kind of tricky. You basically line it up so that the butterfly plate is perfectly flush with the throat, and that there's no light coming in at the top or the bottom when you hold it up. And that's what I'm doing here in the video when I hold it out of shot. I'm holding it up to the light to make sure that the butterfly plate is perfectly aligned. So then I put the two screws into the butterfly there. What I do is I kind of tighten it down. See, I'm holding it up to the light there to check that the plate is in the right place. And what I do is I take one of the screws out. Neither of them have been torqued down at this stage, but they're both kind of just finger tight, I guess. And I take one of them out, and hopefully the other one is kind of tight enough to keep the plate in the place that I've worked out is good. And then I put a little bit of medium strength thread locker on one of the screws, and I put it back in, and again, not like fully torqued down, just enough that it'll hold the plate kind of where I've located it, and I'm holding it up to the light again there to check that it hasn't moved. Then I take the other one out and repeat the process. And a bit of medium strength thread lock fluid. Put it in, and then I hold it up and check again, and if it still looks good, you know, the plate's in exactly the right place, no light getting around the edges, then torque them down. And there you have it. And so the next thing that I do is put on the throttle return plates onto the spindle. And again, you just look at the photographs that you've taken as you've disassembled this, and if you've got the other carb, you've got a good kind of example. So you put it all back together, torque it down with a spanner. Doesn't have to be crazy tight, just hold it in your fingers, torque it down nice and snug. And then I just set the throttle return screw there. And the idea with that is you want it to strike the plate just before the throttle butterfly hits the throat. So you just get it just right. So this is the choke assembly or the enricher assembly, and there's a little dimple that I'm pointing to there on the spindle, and that points towards the U-shaped part of the cover. So you've got to replace the O-ring, and so there's only a few O-rings left. It's the second biggest, so there's two that are the same size, one that's really big, and it's the remaining one. That's the one that you put on the choke spindle. Just give it a squirt with some WD-40. Slide it on. And then yeah, dimple facing, I guess it's kind of forward, but it's towards that U-shaped part of the housing. You push it in, and then you have the choke plates. And again, you just put these on the way they came apart, and I recommend you take a few photographs while you're tearing it apart so that you can look back, but you've also got the other carby to look at as a reference. Put them back on. They face long side forward towards the U-shaped part of the housing. And then you put the nut on and torque it down. Again, just sort of finger tight, you don't have to go crazy on this. So now I'm going to replace this choke or enricher assembly onto the body of the carb. And this is where you replace the little paper gasket. This is a gasket that is notorious for having some problems with the vacuum and sucking in. Especially sucks in around the U-shaped point. So I put a bit of non-hardening gasket sealant there. I used Hylamar Blue, but there are a lot of options. I just put it on the portion of the gasket that gets sucked in, and if you look at my teardown blog entry, that was sucked in on my carbs. Kind of deformed, pulled in by the vacuum. I put a bit of that Hylamar on either side of the gasket. Put it on the body, let it get a little tacky. And then insert the gasket. And put the choke body on with its 4 screws. And snug them down. Just use a kind of crisscross pattern for torquing these. so that it goes down evenly. Just before our final torquing, I check that the action of the choke lever and spindle, I guess, is nice and smooth. And if it's in the right place, feels good, then torque them down the rest of the way. So that's it for the choke housing. And then I put the carb on its top and start working on the jets. So this is the diffuser or atomizer, little part that goes in under the main jet. You can just see there that this is how these parts go together. In my carbs, the diffuser or atomizer was actually quite stuck in the body of the carb. Took a bit of tapping to get it out, but I've cleaned it up, given it a little rub with some sandpaper, and with the help with a screwdriver, it just kind of drops into place there. But what you do is you look through the throat of the carb, and it should be kind of sticking out 4 or 5 millimeters, quite a bit it sticks out, and then you drop the other part of the main jet in there and it sits inside. Then it's time to replace the main jet holder, which sits on top of that. Got to replace the O-ring. The main jet holder is the biggest O-ring that comes in the kit. At this stage, having replaced this throttle spindle and the choke, it's the only big one left. A little squirt of WD-40 and roll it on to the main jet holder. Pretty easy. Yeah, and then pop the main jet holder in on top of those other 2 parts you put in. And then just torque it down till it's snug using a spanner. And again, it's not something that you have to crazily torque. There is no set specification for this. Just torque it down. You can see in that photograph, you can see just how far the diffuser is meant to poke out into the body of the car. So this is the main jet. Let's have a look through, make sure it's clear. In that shot I'm squirting it with a little bit of compressed air, but it's very clear. And you put the washer on, which I nearly forgot. And you just screw that into the back of the main jet holder. And again, snug it down. I think that's a 9mm spanner. Pretty small, 9 or 10. Torque it down, firm but not hard. Well, just a few more jets to put on. There's the idle jet that I'm holding up there, which is the one with the little holes in the side, and these are the remaining 2 O-rings. They're both the same, there's only 2 left. They're really hard to get on, so what I do is a little trick where I use a circlip expander. And some other videos have made this look really easy, but I found it hard, so what I did is mount the O-ring in a circlip expander and then kind of use that to stretch it open, slide it on to the top of the idle jet, then drop the idle jet in just in front of the main jet and screw it down. And that just leaves the mixture screw So that's the mixer screw. It's your last O-ring that you have in the kit. It's the same as the previous one in terms of size, and I put it on the same way. I've tried to put these on by hand, but I find that the circlip applicator really helps. And the mixer adjust screw has a little spring under it just before you drop it into its slot. Oh, it's the spring there in my hand. You just slide that over the screw and drop it into its slot. And then for setting this one, it's obviously something you're going to adjust when you start tuning the bike, but what I do is screw it down until it just bottoms out and then back it off 3 half turns. So 180, 180, 180, 1.5 full turns or 3 half turns. So then it's getting time to put the float assembly back together. First I'll put the float bowl gasket on. Make sure you've cleaned out that channel really nicely. You just drop this little cork gasket on until it sits nicely, like so. And then there's the float. So this is a new float. And this is the old float valve needle hanging on the little tiny bracket. So what I've done is I've discarded the old needle valve and I've got a new one in my kit. And it's really hard to see there, but I'm just threading the little hanger through the hole. And then that hanger drops on to, you can see it there, the new float, like so. And then the float needle drops into the little slot, and I've reused the old float pin. Trying to show there the knurled end, just coming into focus there. So when you pull this apart, you can work out how this goes, but basically you've got to tap this back in so that the knurled end sits snug against the little hole. So you pick up the float, guide the float needle valve into its slot, hanging off the little hanger. That's a bit fiddly. I think that the little hanger is actually non-essential, but still, if you've got it, I think you should use it. So we put this back together and slide the pin back in, and then what I do is I slide it in, but don't tap it down, because you want to kind of test that this float is in the right place. So just tap it gently with a spanner so that it's holding the float. And then what I do is I hold the whole carb up in the air and tilt it to 45 degrees. And this is a little bit as per the Boxer 2 valve video. You just want to, it's hard to explain without, I guess, better video skills than me, but at the point just before the float hits the springiness of the needle, you want it to be parallel with the housing. Hard to explain. I recommend you watch William Plant's Boxer 2 valve video. in this it wasn't quite right, and I pulled it out and kind of bent it a little bit with my thumb and index finger. And then you put it back in and try again. It's kind of hard to explain, but as you tilt the carb from side on to upside down, you kind of find this point where the float starts to bounce, and you want the top of the float and the metal tabs of the float to be parallel with the body of the carb. I haven't demonstrated it very well, but that's what I'm doing here. It's probably the hardest thing to explain. The other float and other carb from this bike, when I put it on, it was perfect. This one just needed the tiniest bit of bending. We're really talking about a couple of mil, if that. And then I just tap the pin back in. And put the float bowl clip back on. And then put the float bowl back on. It should line up perfectly. Pull the clip up. So this is the carb. Flip back over now. You can see in these frames that the diaphragm is really good. Like it looked like it had been replaced relatively recently, so I didn't swap it out even though I had a new one. I'm just showing you that little notch there in the diaphragm, and that lines up with the notch on the right-hand side of the body there. And that helps align the slide. So you put the whole assembly back in, lining up that kind of tab on the rubber diaphragm, lining that with the little reciprocal slot on the body, and then just snug everything in so it's sitting flush, and replace the spring and replace the lid of the carb. This model's just got the 2 screws. So put everything back together, and that's it. And that is looking pretty good and ready to be put back on the bike. Need a bit of fine tuning in terms of the mixture. We'll show that in another video.